All right, boys, let's move on to the next game on the slate, and that's the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl. It's number 5, Ohio State, and number 1, Oregon. It is 5 o'clock on January 1st, ESPN, of course, in the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California. Ohio State is actually favored by 2.5 in this game, and they are the only lower seed to be favored. Notre Dame was favored originally, but that has flipped. And now Georgia is favored over Notre Dame by 1.5 or 2 points or whatever it is. And so, look, Ohio State leads the all-time series 9-2. Oregon has won the last 2. They beat Oregon in 2014 national championship game in the first ever playoff. So this is the big one. I think this is the one that people see maybe being the closest, maybe outside of Notre Dame, Georgia, but up to this point, with the 3 games that have been played, this one will be the one that people are looking the most forward to, I would imagine. And so, Brian, you are going to kick this off with Ohio State and how they got to.
I just want to say this first. I think it's fascinating how many people think that basically the championship game is going to be the winner of this game against the winner of the Notre Dame-Georgia game. I'm not sure I quite have bought that just yet, but it is kind of interesting that people say that. I also want to say this too. I love the fact that this game is being played in the Rose Bowl. This is the best Pac-12 versus Big Ten game we've had in the Rose Bowl in a long freaking time.
And it's 2 Big Ten teams, so there you go.
No, Vince, it's a Pac-12 team and a Big Ten team, okay? Let me live in that for just a couple more days, okay?
Oh, man.
But how Ohio State got here, guys, this team, there's 2 teams that are in the playoff this year, 3 teams that are in the playoff right now that are just at the beginning of the season that everybody thought these are the 3 best teams in college football. And they're all here, right? It was Texas, Georgia, and Ohio State. In some order, most people thought these are the 3 best teams in college football, and they're all here. They're all playing. Now, for Ohio State, it was a little bit of an interesting journey, guys, that for the most part looked like what we thought it was preseason. Preseason, we sat here, Vince, you and I, we did our Big Ten previews, and I said, Ohio State's going to go 11-1. They're going to lose to Oregon in a close game in the regular season, and they're going to beat Oregon in a rematch in the Big Ten championship game. Yep. That's what I predicted. I did not see the Michigan game coming. I did not.
No one did.
And I think what happened in that game is that turned a lot of people off of Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at Ohio State this season, guys, they start the season off with 5 straight blowouts. And they weren't always pretty. Marshall game was a little bit ugly early, but they ended up rolling 49-14. That was after back 50-plus games. They outscored their 2 MAC opponents to start the season 108-6. Beat Marshall. Michigan State, they handled pretty good. Iowa was like 7-0 at halftime, and then they rolled them in the second half. Beat Nebraska in a really ugly game that I felt was a major trap game that was right between Oregon and road games between Oregon and Penn State. Lost to Oregon by a point in a game that I felt was not as close as the final score showed. I think Oregon was the better team that day. They go on the road, they beat Penn State, and you kind of felt like that was the game that was going to launch Ohio State to the rest of the season because of the way they finished. Ohio State under Ryan Day has said this before, the further away they get from the Urban Meyer era, the less physical they become and the more finesse they become. And I watched that Penn State game, and it was a lot of the same. And then the fourth quarter of that game, they just basically said, we're going to run it at you, and there's not a dang thing you can do about it. And they iced that game, and there was nothing Penn State could do about it. And then Ohio State just kind of coasted over the next 3 games. They blow up Purdue, they blow out Northwestern, they whooped a good Indiana football team, and you're thinking, okay, Michigan's about to catch one. That 100 points that Ryan Day promised he was going to hang on Michigan a few years ago, I didn't realize. See, we were mistaken. He meant over the next 4 years we're going to score 100 points eventually in those 4 games.
Have they?
Close.
Okay.
Because they 10 this year. Last year they were at 24, so that's 34. 22, they're at 57. They actually haven't gotten there yet. 57. So they've scored 84 in the last 4 games.
Still 16 points shy. 4 years.
So
got it.
Eventually, by next year, maybe they'll get to 100 against Michigan. But that game obviously was a game where you watched it and you said, I don't know who that is. I watched that game and I still look back and say, I don't know who that team in Scarlet and Gray is, because that's not what we've seen all year. They went completely away from what got them there. and they went completely away from what they did against Tennessee in the first round. And Trevor said it, I believe, and was it you that said it, Trev, when we broke it was all ego.
Yep.
It was Ryan Day got punked by Michigan, and he was going to show that, no, we are tough, and he's not. And they went away from what got him there. And they got beat. And then once it started kind of going downhill, it just snowballed, and there was nothing they could do to get him out of that funk. They needed, and I said this about Notre Dame, guys. Best thing that ever happened to Notre Dame was losing Northern Illinois. I think the best thing that ever happened to Ohio State could be losing to Michigan, because I think it woke that team up a little bit. It says, hey, you're not as good as you think you are. From the standpoint of, you can't just roll the ball out there and just beat teams the way you have the Big Ten every year for the last 5 years. And then when you finally get punched in the mouth, you don't respond well. And I think going in that Tennessee game, they needed time to rest. They needed time to heal. They came out in that Tennessee game, and from the start, fellas, you knew, like the first drive of the game, I said, oh, wow, Tennessee has no chance. Like Ohio State was pissed. You could see it, guys. They were pissed from the beginning of the game. Came out in the all scarlet. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, they are fired up. Just Will Howard dropping dimes, and they rolled Tennessee. And you're like, that's the team that we thought in the preseason we were going to get for most of the year. Is that right there. Played stifling defense, ran the ball enough to keep Tennessee honest, but just attacked them throwing the ball down the field. And their offensive line looked as good as they've looked in a while. Dominant game. Now we're going to find out over these next 3 games, was that just a one-off kind of it all went right? Or is Ohio State finally becoming the team that everybody thought they were going to be in the preseason? So how they got here, the team that we thought they were took a little bit of a twisted turn to get here. But in the first round of the playoff, guys, that Ohio State team that we thought we were going to see in the preseason showed up. And now we finally get that rematch that we thought we were going to see in the preseason as well against Oregon. And it's going to be in the flipping Rose Bowl, which I'm fired up about. Cannot wait to watch that game. I know that
good point.
We're going to be anxiously waiting on the Notre Dame game, but just I love the fact that this game is being played in the Rose Bowl. And that's why I love the fact that the quarterfinal games are in bowls.
Yeah.
I just think that part of it is phenomenal. I love the fact that the Rose Bowl is going to have the best team from the Big Ten against the best team from the Pac-12. And for those of y'all that think I've lost my mind, I've not lost my mind. I know that Oregon's going to have a Big Ten logo here, but they're still a Pac-12 team. So let me just live in that as we get ready for the Rose Bowl. Okay, just let me have this one. Okay.
Oh boy, Trevor. Let's talk about those Ducks from whatever conference that they are now associated with. How did they get here to the Rose Bowl?
Yeah, man. I mean, I brought it up when we were talking about Boise State, but Oregon is the only undefeated team coming into this playoffs, and they, in conference play, along with Boise State, remained unscathed, and they avoided some of the monumental disasters that we saw some teams inherit in the month of November. Month of November was crazy, guys. Like in college football, you know, we were talking about it, and we were like, man, after October's over, like now it's, we start looking at everybody's schedule, and it's like, okay, most likely teams are going to win out. These teams are going to be playing in the conference championship. And when there's chaos to happen, it'll happen. And that's kind of my biggest takeaway of the season. But luckily for Oregon, that didn't happen. So they won the Big Ten title in a shootout against Penn State, 45-37, in a game that was never really that close. Oregon held a 2-touchdown lead for most of the game. It was just Penn State could kind of never overcome that 10-point hump, But they had big wins over the regular season as well. There's a lot of teams out there that can go undefeated, but you go back and look at their schedules, they might not be that battle tested. They blew out everybody that they played. They haven't had to win different styles of football games, but they had a big win over Ohio State in the middle of October, 32-31. But it was weird for them, right? They struggled in the first 2 weeks. I mean, I remember looking at the score of the Idaho game, and I was like, what in the world? Because everybody was hyping up Oregon. They're like, they got, Dan Lanning's coming back, and they have Dylan Gabriel, super experienced. Tez Johnson's back. This is going to be a nasty football team. And they beat Idaho by 10 points, and they followed that up a week later by beating Boise State by 3 at home. I think the win over Oregon State is really kind of what got them going, and they got their feet under them, and they didn't really look back. They avoided disaster against Wisconsin. When they played them in Madison, they won 16-13. And, Brian, you and I have had discussions about this, of the mark of a good football team is being able to win different styles of game. And Wisconsin was able to take away what Oregon liked to do best. And it's like, okay, can you guys grind it out and win a low-scoring physical football game? And they showed that they could. Yeah, they finished their season rolling Washington 49-21. That's an old Pac-12 rivalry, especially when you factor in what happened last year in the Oregon-Washington games. But, I mean, Oregon is kind of who they have been for a long time. They'll throw the ball all over the yard. They play with a lot of pace, not as fast as like the 2011, 2012 Chip Kelly offenses, but they like to get on the ball. They utilize their speed. They have great athletes at wide receiver, and they're being led by one of the hottest coaches in all of college football right now. Dan Lanning is 35-5. And that's really, really impressive. So, Oregon comes into this, and I think from a matchup perspective, it's going to look somewhat similar to what it did in the first game. Neither teams are overly physical. I think Oregon showed that they weren't that physical against Penn State. I mean, Penn State had 2 running backs over 100 yards rushing, and that was a question mark. Can Oregon handle Penn State's physicality? They couldn't, but the counter to that was Penn State could not hang with Oregon's speed. Now you have 2 teams with really electric weapons on the perimeter, and it's going to be a fun one, man. I mean, but that's been Oregon's journey to get here. It's relatively, I don't want to say boring, but when you're talking about a team that has no losses, it's pretty straightforward talking about what their path was to get here. So first year in the Big Ten, they came in and won the title, which I think that made Oregon was the first year in their conference. They won. Arizona State was the first year in their conference, and they won. SMU was their first year in their conference. They played for it, and Texas was the first year in that conference that they played for it. So makes for an interesting narrative overall, but Oregon's on the right track. So that's how they got here.
Boys, I think this matchup is fascinating, frankly. And I know that they've played once already. It's very difficult to win twice, obviously. I mean, that's how it usually goes when it comes to rematches and things of that nature. The rematch isn't always in the college football playoff, which, it obviously there's more on the line. And, what matchups are you guys kind of looking at here that are going to decide this game and the way it goes? Because depending on when you talk to me, for me personally, I go one way, I go another way. Like I'm not, I've got a score written down, but I'm not sure if that's what I'm sticking with. You know what I mean? Like that's how I am with this game. I don't feel that way about any of the other games that are going to be played in this round, but except for this one. So Brian, what are your thoughts on some of the matchups that could be key for this one?
I'm going to go with a storyline first, if that's okay.
No, absolutely.
I think one of the things that we have to there are certain coaches who are being prescribed with can't win the big game, need to prove they can win the big game. Ryan Day is obviously one for Ohio State. James Franklin's another. There's a couple young coaches in this playoff that have to prove that they can do that as well, and another veteran coach that has to prove he can do that. What has Steve Sarkisian proven to get the benefit of the doubt that he can lead a team this deep? What has Marcus Freeman done to prove that he's a guy that can lead a team to a championship? What has Dan Lanning done to prove that? I mean, look, they had the 1 point home win over Ohio State. Great win. Don't get me wrong. It's a great win. But this is still a guy that's 0 against Kalen DeBoer, right? This is a guy that lost twice, I believe, to Utah in his first year, correct? Or was that the year before he got there, right? I mean, this is a guy that still has a lot to prove that he can win these big games, because what we're seeing with Dan Lanning and Marcus Freeman and Ryan Day and Steve Sarkisian, James Franklin, is these guys all have proven that they can beat teams where they have the better roster. What we're going to find out in this playoff is who are the coaches that can now take that next step as a coach. And that's an intriguing part of this. The winner of this game is going to get that. But I don't think we're talking about Dan Lanning in the same breath that we should. In that, has he really proven that he is a championship coach yet? No, he has not. Just like Marcus Freeman is not, because he's a young coach.
Well, not one. There's only one coach in the playoffs left has won a national championship.
Exactly, but not everybody gets talked about in the same breath, right?
That's fair.
Ryan Day has had more big wins than Dan Lanning and Marcus Freeman.
Fair.
Like, can we be honest about that? Now, he has lost to Michigan, but he's had his plenty of big wins, beating Penn State every year, So, yes, Ryan Day has got a lot to prove, and he hasn't proven that he can win many playoff games, but he did win one. They did beat Clemson in 2020. So a lot of these coaches have a lot to prove, and I think this game is if Ryan Day wins, it not only gets a big monkey off of his back to a degree, but it also then maybe makes people start to question, like, okay, Dan Landy's a great coach, but is he really that guy yet? Right? Because every time he goes against these top coaches, he catches L's more than he catches W's, right? When he goes against these other teams, and when the rosters that he's playing are on the par of his, can he win those football games? So I think that's an interesting storyline for both of these coaches. Getting to the football part of it, guys, I love this matchup. This is going to be a great matchup. And the rematch aspect of it is huge. My big thing is I just don't know that you can beat Ohio State twice in 1 year. That's a tall task, very tall task. And some of the things that obviously the game is going to be out west. I think that advantage Oregon. The fact that these Ohio State players haven't played in the Rose Bowl in several years, it's not like it used to be where they're playing in the Rose Bowl every year. That trip out west is going to be a little bit different. So I don't think that the neutral field necessarily favors Ohio State. I think it favors Oregon a little bit more. They've played in the stadium more recently when they play UCLA in the regular season. But then on the other side, guys, Oregon and Ohio State, to me, it's going to come down to Oregon gave you your best shot in the first game. They gave you your best shot. They pulled out all the stops. They're going to be more prepared for the deep ball. They're going to be more prepared for the speed of that Oregon offense. There's a lot of things that, like, you kind of showed your hand a little bit. Now the question is, can Jim Knowles and this defense actually stop it this time? I think that's the intriguing matchup. I think Ohio State can move the ball on Oregon if they play Ohio State football and stop trying to be something that you're not. And there's two great unknowns to me about this game, Trev. Number one, yes, we know Ohio State knows what to do to stop Oregon and the speed that Oregon has, but can they actually do it? And then the other side of the ball is, which version of Chip Kelly / Ryan Day shows up for this game? Is it the one that understands we should own the perimeter? Or is it the one that still feels like, hey, we got to pretend that we can run the ball because our pride got hurt when we got punked by Michigan 3 times in a row, now 4? That's the big question for me. And that before we even get into individual matchups, that coaching aspect right there, guys, for me is going to be very interesting.
I think that, gosh, this matchup is so tough to decide because it's a lot of the matchups we've talked about is like, can the speed of this team outlast the strength and size of this team? Like, the narrative of this is which team, I guess, can be the faster team. You know what I mean? Like that's why that's why Ohio State did what they did to Tennessee. They went back to, well, you're not a tough football team. Yeah, we know. Go guard Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith on the perimeter. You can't. You know what I mean? I think that's what's going to be interesting. I mean, Oregon kind of took that challenge head on when they played Penn State. It's like, hey, you're not going to be physical enough to beat us down in the trenches. Like, yeah, that's fine. Stop Tez Johnson. Stop our high-speed offense. And so now you have two very similar teams. To me, from a matchup perspective, I think what this is going to come down to is, can Ohio State generate pressure on the quarterback? You guys know how many sacks Ohio State had the first time against Dylan Gabriel?
I thought they had one. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you give a quarterback like that time to go back and sit in the pocket and give him time to set up shop back there. It doesn't matter how good your secondary is going to do. He's going to find somebody that's open. You know what I mean? Like, to your point, Brian, about the narratives of, are they going to resort back to old Ohio State? The one thing that kind of peaks in your mind is Quinshon Judkins in that game went 11 carries for 23 yards, averaged 2.1 yards per carry. So are they going to get in their feelings again about, hey, no, like we're going to establish the ground game, or are they going to do what got them to this point?
And if you do run the ball, give it to Travion. He better, first of all, he's a better running back. And I know that 100%. Travion can't handle the load, right? That the injuries have he's not a 20 carry back like we thought he was going to be as a freshman. I just think the injuries have kind of sapped him of that. I get that, but you don't have this elite offensive line. You have a line that has some experience and some veteran players. You can run the outside zones. You can run the misdirections. Get back to being that team, not this one that wants to run the ball downhill in the A and B gap. We saw that, and that's what we saw last week against Tennessee is some of the stretch stuff and getting Travion going. That's your horse. Like, that's your big play back. That's the guy that's going to get you here and get you to that next level is, in my opinion, is Travion in the run game, because I think he also complements the like Quinshot Junkins, the kind of hammer bulk carry guy, because he's a bulk carry guy. He needs lots of touches. I don't think that fits with what they need to be as an offense, Trevor. That's the thing for me. I think Travion is more of he's a lot like, like a Jeremiah Love, a Jadarian Price, where he may go 3, 2, -1, 5, 6, and then 70. You know what I mean? Like, I think he's the guy you've got to build this thing around in this matchup, Vince. I don't know if you agree with that, Vince. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but like, to me, guys, that's the big key for me is Travion's got to be more of a focal point of this game plan, much more so than he was in the game they played earlier in the season. And we saw that against Tennessee, and that's why he ripped off a couple big runs. I think that's a big key is, do they try to be the ground and pound in the box, or do they say, hey, we're a fast team, let's play fast?
I think if you're Ohio State, I think you want to be a little bit of both. I think you do want to ground and pound it, but I do think they also want to play a little bit fast. I mean, Trevor, you mentioned, earlier when you were talking about how Oregon got to where they are and all of that, how they can kind of win games in different ways, right? They can win it by chucking the ball over the place. They can win it by punching you in the mouth and going with the slow, drag it out, like they did against Wisconsin. I still think Ohio State's best avenue to win the game is to play the game like Wisconsin. You want to run the ball. You want to punch them in the mouth. You want to be the more physical team. That's what you want to do. Now, it's going to be up to Oregon on how they respond to that.
You think that's what Ohio State wants to do? Is that what you said?
I think that's what they should do. I don't know if that's what they want to do, because for me, look, Will Howard played great in the last game they played. Up until that point, I wasn't a big Will Howard believer that he could put the team on his back and do some different things. I think it's going to be different in the Rose Bowl, on the road, bowl game, big, even bigger stage, not at home, those kinds of things. I don't know if you want to put it all on Will Howard. I just don't know that that's really the game plan that you want to have. Now, he's going to have to make some plays, absolutely. But I don't think the game plan should be, if you're Chip Kelly and you're Ryan Day, I don't think the game plan is 18 is going to win it for us. I just don't think that's what I don't think that's a safe bet, in my opinion. Now, I could be completely wrong.
I mean, I get where you're coming from. Look, I think he played phenomenal last week.
He did.
I don't think that's a repeatable performance, but I think you're gonna need him to do that though. Like, could they run the ball on Oregon? Sure, they can, but not playing, in just my opinion, the ground and pound style. It's balancing it with your throwing game. No, Will Howard's not a stud, but you've got a phenomenal receiving core. I mean, Cardinal Tate's a starter on anyone else, like a number 1, at worst number 2 guy on every team that Ohio State's played this year other than Oregon. I mean, he's the number 1 receiver at Penn State. He's the number 1 receiver he'd be the number 1 receiver for Notre Dame. Like, he's a dude, right? I mean, the other kid that they have, the sophomore they had, the kid from Florida, he's a dude. And they're 3 and 4 on this receiving core. And that's the problem, is your best part of your team is your pass catchers. And that's where I think Oregon is most vulnerable, is being able to throw the ball vertically. What I think Ohio State did a pretty decent job of against Tennessee is they came out and went to that. It was off tackle, some downhill, and then throwing the ball down the field. That's kind of my big thing, is I need to see more of that. I just don't think they have the offensive line to be a ground and pound team. I don't think they have that unit with all the injuries they've had up front. They don't have Seth McLaughlin anymore. He's out for the year. They're All-American center. I don't know that they're a team that physically can do that against a team like Oregon. You're going to have to get the ball on the perimeter. I think you're going to have to stretch the field. You're going to have to get Travion the ball. I think that's a mistake they made in the first game, is they tried to run downhill at Oregon, and they just don't have the horses to do that. And Quinshot Junkins, to me, is just not that dude. Maybe he will be this game. But I saw that guy take several short yardage guys about to hit him, curl up in the fetal position and take the hit, including a 4th and 1. And I don't know that Travion's the guy you want to be doing that with either, because I don't want him to get hurt. But, man, he to me is the secret weapon. Not the secret weapon. He's not a secret.
X factor.
There you go. He's the X factor. If they get him going, I don't know that Oregon it's going to become a shootout. And I don't know if you can win a second shootout against Ohio. It's like USC did what they did in Notre Dame that one game, but if they play a month later, USC's not scoring 35 on Notre Dame.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Right. And that's the thing with Oregon is, can they do that? I have a lot more faith. And I guess, Trev, this is where ultimately we'll get to the prediction, but this is ultimately where I think this game comes down to. I have more faith in Ohio State's defense to make the key stops in this game on a neutral field than I do Oregon's on a neutral field. That's a big thing for me. I think this is a more proven Ohio State off defense. And now the other part is, but they've played 2 now in a row pretty slow, methodical offenses. We talked about this last week, guys. Tennessee does not have the offense people think they do. They're a team that hasn't scored many points in 2 months, right? And this is going to be a different level of speed. Does Ohio State need another adjustment period in this game, kind of like they did the last time they played? And will the offense be able to keep them in the game? But I think that's the thing for me is if it comes down to which offense do I think is better, and I have more faith in Oregon's offense because of the quarterback. But the gap between the offenses is a lot closer than in my opinion, the gap between the 2 defenses. That's a big part of this matchup for me, Trev.
Yeah, I mean, for me, for the matchup, I'm glad you brought up the defense because I think that's going to be more telling of what happens in this game. Like, I have no question that Ohio State's offense is going to be able to move the ball and put points on the board. But in their first matchup, you came away with 0 sacks, and your number 1 corner got absolutely cooked. 7 targets, 7 receptions, $143 on the ground, and 2 touchdowns. So was that a fluke? Or is that what happens when Denzel Burke plays a really fast wide receiver? You know what I'm saying? So it's like it's going to be interesting to me what narrative kind of comes out there, because I have no question that Jeremiah Smith and Egbuka and Travion Henderson and that offense is going to be able to move the ball. Yeah. I mean, Penn State hung 37 points on this defense, and I think that Ohio State's offense is significantly better than Penn State's offense. I do.
Yep.
But I don't know what version of Ohio State's defense that we are going to see. If you can get after Dylan Gabriel, and if Denzel Burke can just literally allow half of what he gave up the first game, I think they're going to be fine. Like, I am willing to believe that if you look at his performances over the season and you look at it, it is the outlier. But the other thing that's also the outlier is he didn't face another receiver like Evan Stewart that season, right? So what is it gonna be? Like, they haven't faced another quarterback like Dylan Gabriel this year. What is that going to look like for them? That's what it comes down to for me.
I think we're going to find out, was that just a bad game for that defense, or is this what happens when they play speed? I think it's a great observation. I mean, I tend to think it was more of a bad game, like Christian Gray had against USC.
Sure.
That's what I think. Because I saw him doing things where he was getting grabby. He was like you could tell that the speed gave him a problem because of who they had played coming into that game. So even though they haven't played any speed since then, there's a difference between you just played Iowa, Michigan State, Marshall, Western Michigan, and Akron coming into that game, and now where you've played Penn State, Purdue, Northwestern, Indiana, Michigan, and Tennessee coming into this game. I think that's a big thing for me. And because you have the time off, you got a lot more chances to go good on good in practice that first week and a half of practice.
Sure.
Where now let's go have Denzel have to cover Emeka and Jeremiah for that first week of practice and some 7-on-7s and help them get used to that speed. So I do think Ohio State's going to be better prepared for that. But to your point, you can know it's coming, and you know they're going to throw a go ball to Jeremiah Smith. It doesn't mean you can cover him, right? You may know that they're going to run this route to Tez Johnson. Doesn't mean you can cover him. And I think that's a great observation, and it's going to be a big part of this game, guys. Is Ohio State's defense what I think it is? If it is, I think the Buckeyes win because I think they're going to make more stops. I don't think they're going to shut Oregon down.
No,
really good Oregon offense. This is going to be like a 34-10 game unless Oregon just lays an egg. That can always happen to anybody. This is like when Florida did that to Ohio State back in 2006. If they play a week later, Ohio State scores a lot more on that Florida team than they did in the 2006 title game. That's how football goes sometimes, right? But who's going to make the big stop to you're up 7, they're trying to tie it late in the first half. You make a stop, you get a field goal, and instead of it being a tie game, you're now up 10, right? Or you go up 7, you go up 4. Your defense makes a stop, you get your offense the ball back, and you can put the game away. which defense can make the most stops. And right now, that's ultimately where I'm going down to. Is I think both of these offenses, when they're on, are really good. Oregon's has been more, I'd say, more consistent. Although the game against, because Ohio State looks phenomenal at times, and then at times. Oregon's has rarely looked phenomenal. I thought it looked phenomenal against Penn State, but it's usually just really good. And it's, other than Wisconsin, hasn't had a lot of those, what the heck was that moments. Ohio State's been more up and down. The Ohio State defense is, to me, the key in this game. But I think your point, Trevor, is spot on. Name me an offense that's similar to what Oregon's is that they've faced since then. And I would say Indiana's. I mean, I do think Indiana has a good talent on offense, but it's still nothing like what Oregon's speed-wise. And that's going to be I think that's a very, very intriguing part of this matchup, Trev. I think that's a spot-on analysis.
All right, boys, let's hit the prediction train. Brian, lead us off.
I got Ohio State winning the rematch, guys. I'm going to stick with what I said in the preseason. I said Oregon is going to win the regular season game. Ohio State's going to win the postseason rematch. I thought it'd be the Big Ten title game. It's a playoff game instead. Right. It's the Rose Bowl. Look, I'm not someone that believes that Ohio State all of a sudden figured it out and they're going to be that team against Tennessee. I don't think Tennessee was as good as people made them out to be. I think that we thought that if Ohio State showed up, they could win that game and win that game convincingly. We just weren't sure if they're going to show up. I don't know that this is something they can do for 4 straight games, but they don't need to. They don't need to play like that to keep winning games. If they play like that, they'll blow everybody they play out until the title game. Because I think Georgia and Notre Dame would both give them competitive games and not let them play quite like that. But I still think this is a really talented football team that if you take away the Michigan game, no one's surprised that Ohio State's the favorite in this game. And as a Notre Dame fan, I have to be honest and consistent about that, because I can't just say, well, I'm going to hold that Michigan game against them, because otherwise then I'd have to say, well, I'm going to hold the Northern Illinois game against Notre Dame. I'm going to go with who they were on all but one weekend. And all but one weekend, that Ohio State offense was pretty good and showed that they could do what they needed to do. You could maybe throw the Penn State game in there, but I think Penn State's got a better defense than Oregon does. I think Michigan's got a better defense than Oregon does. I don't know that Oregon has what it takes to slow down Ohio State enough. The big key is going to be for Oregon, can they force Will Howard into mistakes? That's going to be the big key. I don't know that they're going to be able to do enough of it. At least I think they're going to be countered by the mistakes that Ohio State forces Dylan Gabriel into. And that's what's going to come down to. So I have Ohio State winning 35-31. I think this is going to be a great game. I think this is 2 excellent football teams. I think the 4 best teams in the playoff right now are these 2 teams in Notre Dame and Georgia. I think those are the 4 best teams in the playoff right now. They're both going to play. I think it's going to be a great game. I just think Ohio State has too much firepower combined with the better defense. That's why I'm going with the Buckeyes to win 35-31. Plus, guys, this is what I predicted in the preseason, that they would win the rematch, and there's nothing that I've seen that makes me think that that's going to change. Can Oregon win? Absolutely, Oregon can win this game. I just think Ohio State's the better team.
Yeah, our score predictions are almost identical. I have Ohio State winning 34-31. I think Oregon's going to get the ball at the end of the game with a chance to win, and that's when the defense steps up. But like I brought up before, I don't know if I'm willing to bet that Denzel Burke is going to allow the same thing. I don't know if Ohio State's defense is not going to get a single sack. You know, Ohio State's defense also didn't force a turnover, I don't think, in that game either. So, you know, it's going to be one of those where I don't know if that's going to be able to happen again. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel confident, especially with this being a rematch, walking away saying that Ohio State's going to get no sacks, no turnovers, get outrushed, outpassed again. I don't. And with this being more of a neutral site game, you factor all those things in, Ohio State ended up losing by 1 point, you know, with an opportunity to win at the end of the game. So I'm taking the Bucks in this one. I do think that some of the teams, and this is overall, I think some of the teams that had the bye week are going to experience some of the rust that the round 1 playoff teams did. Like, I think playing in round 1 is going to be a benefit to teams like Notre Dame and Ohio State, because they got to get some of that out. They got to get some of the rust out, whereas these teams have been sitting now at the time of kickoff for 25 days. So, yes, on one hand, you have, you know what, like they got the rest, they're back healthy. All of that is true. They also haven't played a snap of football in almost a month. So I think Ohio State's rolling. I think that win over Tennessee is going to propel them forward, and I think they're going to win in a close one, 34-31.
Vince, we're going to go to you next, but when you finish, there is a question I want to ask you two guys before we move on to the Notre Dame Georgia game.
Okay. So my prediction, I'm in the same neighborhood as you guys as with a close game. There's no doubt about it. I think it's going to be a little bit more low scoring. I guess my faith is in the Ohio State defense and what they're going to be able to do, and my lack of faith in Will Howard. So I've got a little bit more low scoring, but I still think Ohio State's going to win. And so I've got it 24-21. So I think Ohio State will score enough. And I do think Ohio State, you talked about that big stop, when that's going to happen, who's going to make it. I think Ohio State gets that big stop at the end of the game to win the game. I think the defense wins the game for them, to be honest with you. So 24-21 Ohio State over Oregon. So what's your question, boss?
If Ohio State wins, I think, barring them just getting destroyed in one of the final two games, something will happen. I think some of the pressure comes off of Ryan Day. Right, getting the semifinals. Now you're either going to lose to Texas or Notre Dame or Georgia, most likely. Right, if you don't win it all, you're losing. And I think that's kind of respectable. Does the pressure get turned back up on him if they lose this game? Like, do you think they go right back to where it was pre-Tennessee, or do you think the blowout of Tennessee was enough to kind of say, okay, let's just chill out. Let's see if we can go beat Michigan next year and kind of see how it goes, or do you think it ramps back up? I'm curious what you guys think. The storyline in Columbus is going to be if they lose this game. I mean, obviously part of it's how they lose. So
sure.
Not like a blowout, but let's just say it's a
close
good football game and Oregon just is the better team in the fourth quarter.
Look, we've got some Ohio State fans in the chat, so I'm curious as to what they think about this because they're the fans, short for fanatic.
But
so
they're also, especially Archer, they're a little bit more reasonable.
Well,
than
most
maybe
of the time,
your average Buckeye.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think that win over Tennessee was huge for Ryan Day, even though it was at home. I get it, but there were plenty of people calling for Tennessee to win that game, and they had the stadium takeover and the whole deal. So winning that game in the manner that they won that game, I think, got a lot of people off of his back. Losing this game in the short term will not be good. There will be a lot of talk going on. The best thing that could happen for Ryan Day is the offseason at that point, because now people are going to be focused on other games, other things, and then he'll kind of be able to coast into the offseason. If he gets blown out here, it's going to be a lot louder, obviously, but I do think that Tennessee game does hold some sway, and I think it kind of quieted some things down a little bit. So they're going to, if they lose, they got to lose close. They absolutely have to lose close.
I think it ramps back up, just not to the degree that it was before Tennessee in any loss, because I think when you do this, you have to look at the season as a whole. And I've been saying this for the last couple of weeks. With the team that they put together and the players that they convinced to come back and the coordinator that they hired on offense and Jim Knowles going into his third year, the minimum expectation was you beat Michigan, you win the Big Ten, and you go on a playoff run. And right now they're 0-2, and they're on their way to making a playoff run.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a loss is kind of like, okay, you beat a team at home convincingly. But
Right.
Brian, I'm in the same boat as you of I didn't think Tennessee was as good as what people made them out to be. I did not see that being a 25-point game.
Exactly. Exactly.
I will admit that. I expected that game to be close, low scoring. The narrative still being, I didn't think
if
Tennessee
the Buckeyes whooped them, it'd have been like 34-20.
Right. I did
Right.
not see it being 42-17. With it never, ever, ever, ever being that close, right? That was an impressive win. So I think that win kind of cushioned it a little bit. But I think once I'm actually going a little bit opposite of Vince, I think it'll sting a little bit at first in that, oh man, I wish we could have made the playoff run. And then I think once time settles and the dust settles a little bit and people look at the season as a whole, it's like, yo, this season should have been so much better than no Big Ten championship, no win over Michigan, and one playoff win. I think that's when it'll start to sink in, and I think the noise will start to ramp up a little bit. But that Tennessee win definitely bought Ryan Day a lot more time. I really do. So I think it ramps back up, but not to the height that it was before Tennessee.
I think if they lose this game in any fashion, the heat's gonna be back on them. But I don't think it's gonna be as hot as it was before the Tennessee game. I'm kind of in the middle. I think that there's gonna be pressure on him. I think he'll go into next season a bit on, I don't know, hot seat, but definitely warmed up seat for sure. going into next season, and then it's going to be like, dude, you not only better beat Michigan and win the Big Ten, but you better get to the championship game. I think that's going to be sort of the conversation next year. Because, I mean, if you think about it, guys, you haven't won a neutral site playoff game since 2020, right? And then that's the only one that you have won. They lost to Clemson in 19 in the first round. You beat Clemson in the next year, but then got blown up by Bama. You didn't make it in 21. 22, you made it. Yeah, you played a great game against Georgia, but you still got beat. And then you didn't make it in 23, and you lost to an SEC team in the playoff. Like, the postseason has not been good to Ohio State under Ryan Day. And you know, like you say, he hasn't won a Big Ten title since 2020. I do think the pressure comes back up. I just don't think it reaches the boil that it was pre-Tennessee, because it was just the nature of losing to Michigan. But I do think going into next year, you're like, dude, you lost in the quarterfinals. You know what I mean? Like, to the same team twice, a new team in the Big Ten. Like, you're not even the best team. You're not even the second best team in the Big Ten right now. You're the third best team in the Big Ten, because you still can't beat Michigan, and Michigan's won a title, so they're still ahead of you as a program. I know they weren't as good this year, but they still beat you. The worst Michigan team since 2020 still beat you this year, and I think that's gonna be a I at home, by the way, at home in Columbus.
Yeah.
So I think the Heat does go back up. But I think if he wins this game, as long as the game they lose afterwards isn't a blowout, I think the Heat's off, and it's like, okay, calm down, everybody. They're going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then, it may ramp up if you lose to Michigan again next year, but I think that at least takes some of that burden off, and people will calm down and be like, okay, look, this is because I think at that point in time, Trev, they kind of look around like, guys, look what's happening in college football right now.
Sure.
I mean, look what's happening to some of these teams. And yeah, Ryan Day's not winning at all, but the steadiness is something to be admired in this era where you can go 13-1 one year and 2-10 the next.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, I think it comes down to the roster conversation. Like, that's how, at least personally, that's how I look at it. If you can't win and make a run with this roster, I mean, what roster are you going to do that with? Because to me, that comes down to coaching. I mean, look at who they're losing. They're going to lose both their running backs. Will Howard's gone. Igbuka's gone. On defense, you're losing Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Tylik Williams, Denzel Burke, Lathan Ransom, Cody Simon. Like, if you're not going to do it with them, like, what's going to be the backup for Ryan Day? It's like, well, just wait till next year. And it's like, to when you have who? Still great athletes, right? Like, it's not like they're going to replace them with a bunch of bums. But you have experience, you have athleticism, you have size, you have speed. If that's not going to do it, we're just supposed to trust that you're going to do it with not those guys.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's how I look at it.
Yeah.
What if Ohio State wins this game and then loses to Arizona State?
Honestly, I think that would just be like, guys, you lost to because then Arizona State's in the title game. And I think the perception of Arizona, look, guys, they beat Texas. They beat you. You beat Oregon. You beat Tennessee. I think there'd be disappointment, but I think the hot seat talk. Like, look, if Notre Dame, Georgia, Ohio State, or Texas don't win the title, there's going to be disappointment. But disappointment's different than this bum's got to go, which is kind of the narrative after the Michigan game. I think if you win this game, it doesn't matter what happens next, barring an embarrassing blowout to somebody.
Right.
Like, I think if they played Notre Dame in the title game and just get rolled, or play Georgia Side and get rolled, or Texas beats them in the semis and get rolled, I think then maybe you start to hear that ramp up a little bit. But having wins over Penn State on the road, Tennessee at home, and Oregon on a neutral field would be enough to say, guys, Ohio State's going to be fine. Take a deep breath. This is the new world of NIL and all this other kind of stuff. They're going to be okay. Even with a loss, because then you lost in the semifinals to a team that made the championship game. It's like Michigan losing to, and that's what a lot of Ohio State fans are going to say. Hey, guys, remember when Michigan lost to TCU, a team that had no business being a Big 12 team? Want to remember what they did the next year? You guys remember what Michigan did the next year? Won a title. You're going to hear that spin, and honestly, it's legitimate spin. I mean, that's a fair thing to say. If you beat Oregon, I think that calms everything down.
Okay.
There's still going to be some people that don't like Ryan Day, but it's not going to be the same. He's got to go. They're going to replace him with Freeman. They're going to replace him with Vrabel. They're going to replace him with John Gruden. They're going to replace him with Nick Saban. Heck, Urban Meyer's going to come back. I'm being sarcastic with some of those names, but you guys get the point, right? I literally heard someone say Urban Meyer might come back. and coach him again. I'm like, okay, sure. Let's go with that. But yeah, I just was curious. I thought that's an interesting. I think this is a big game, and I think Archer said it. We said at the beginning, if Ohio State wins, I do think people start finally asking the question about Dan Lanning. Can he truly actually win the big games?
Yeah.
Because then his only big game win is a home regular season win over Ohio State, and then a neutral field win over a coach who has literally proven he can't win games like that his entire career, and James Franklin, right? I think we start asking that question about Oregon now. So it'll be interesting because I'd say the same thing. If not now, when? You couldn't do it with Bo Nix.
Right.
You can't do it with Dylan Gabriel. You got Tess Johnson. You got Evan Stewart. You got all this talent. If you can't do it now, when? I think that's true for a lot of teams in the playoff right now, especially these two in Texas. I think those three teams have more pressure on them than anybody else in the playoff. Because like Georgia's like, guys, we don't have our starting quarterback. Notre Dame can be like, look, we're down like 7 starters to season-ending injuries. We've gotten further, blah, blah, blah. I think there's more pressure on Texas, Ohio State, and Oregon to make a deep run and win it all than there is anybody else in the playoff, which only adds to the excitement about this particular game. So good talk. Thanks for indulging me in that conversation, fellas.
No problem. All right, let's